Most Kenyans are still in shock at the utterances of the Police Inspector General Japheth Koome. I mean, what this man said is very difficult not only to digest, but even to explain. But actually there's a very simple explanation. It will not ease the pain in most Kenyans. It will not ease the pain of those who have lost loved ones, but at least it will solve the mystery. It is probably a little known fact, but actually it should not be a little known fact. Yeah. Indeed, for close observers, it should be obvious. But for most people, it's a little known fact. Now, before we come to it, let us agree that a police inspector general has to be very careful what they say. Because most Kenyans put their security, their safety, and the protection of their property, in the hands of the police. And the person who heads the police is the Inspector General. And therefore, ideally, an Inspector General should not speak too much. And on the few occasions when they speak, they should give confidence to the public that one, this man knows what he's talking about. Two, this man has a lot of information, a lot of which will help protect me and my property, etc., etc. But when a police inspector general opens his mouth and gives information which the vast majority of Kenyans already know is false, then you know that as a country, you're in very, very serious trouble. Now, you know there's something which maybe the Inspector General of Police does not know, has forgotten, or has decided to totally ignore. And that has to do with what happened to some of his predecessors who were too close to politics and the government. Because if he knew, if he remembered, he would behave very differently from how he has been behaving from the minute he was appointed to his position at police headquarters. And I'll also come to that shortly. But first, this little known fact. Now, it is very easy for any keen observer to know who the close associates of William Samoei Ruto are. It's very simple. Grade 2, basic. You don't even have to be intelligent to realize it. Do you know what it is? Do you know what this thing which stands out very clearly, very obvious, is? Okay. If you still don't know, let me give you a further clue. Founding father of the nation, gallant politician, Tom Mboya, used to have his pointmen countrywide. And one of his pointmen was an illiterate man, a man who had never been to school, called Mbolu Malu. Now Mbolu Malu was a legislator in Ukambani. And when Mbolu Malu spoke, if you listened carefully, you would say to yourself, isn't this Tom Mboya speaking? In a different accent, in a different place in Kenya? But isn't this exactly what the man would say, Mboya would say? Now, all supporters, all people who are close to William Ruto speak the same. They think the same. They act the same. Okay, just do your research. It's rather obvious. And now it is very obvious that the Inspector General of Police is actually very deep into Kenyan politics. Because if you really think about it very deeply, what Koome said may have been more for the consumption of outsiders than the consumption of Kenyans. Okay? The ICC the international criminal courts at The Hague, which have been collecting evidence in the country called Kenya on police brutality. And therefore, what Koome said is in defense of the police. And what he was saying is that no, the evidence you've collected is false. Why? Because those bodies were hired and planted. And if you want to know we're on to something, just take a look at the timing. It is always the timing that enables you to see through a politician. Okay? Although, of course, Japheth Koome is not a politician, and according to our constitution, is supposed to be very far from politics, especially partisan politics. Because if you support the government, there is a political party from which the president comes from. That is partisan politics. You're supporting one side. Anyway, something very shocking that comes out of this latest development is the fact that Koome, it is true, there is a problem with the ICC. Why? Because the Inspector General of Police is already mounting the defense of the police. That should be rather obvious, because this comment from the Inspector General of Police came from nowhere. Never mind the fact that the pain it has caused Kenyans. I would say it's something very close to incitement. This is really incitement. Because imagine you've lost a loved one, to police brutality, and then the boss of the police comes out and says what Japheth Koome said yesterday morning, during the day, in plain sight, in front of the media, in front of Kenyans. What would be going through your mind right now? And I'm sure you've noticed that this pain has extended even to those Kenyans who did not lose anybody, to the maandamanos. So you can begin to imagine what those who are close to this thing are feeling. It's toxic. Hey. And according to Kumekucha Chris, it is irrefutable evidence that some people are under serious pressure. Some people have been cornered by too much evidence. Okay? And therefore this is their way of fighting back. Indeed, this is just a Hail Mary. Indeed, this is what they call in intelligence circles a Hail Mary. A very desperate move which you make when you have got no other play. And you're making this move hoping that perhaps by chance you'll get lucky and this thing somehow will work. Because Azimio has been too smart for UDA. That's the truth. Just go back a little to when this saga started. Azimio have been very consistent, and meanwhile they've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes. I am very reliably informed that evidence has been collected, watertight evidence. In my view, even before those investigators arrived, even before the ICC got involved, Azimio somehow read what UDA would do, how they try to react to this. And therefore from day one, they were very careful to collect watertight evidence, something that can stand up in a court of law without anybody breaking into a sweat. I'm sorry to say this, but it seems UDA have been always clueless. Because when they were waiting for maandamano to resume, when they knew for sure Raila Odinga would take Azimio back to the streets and the people of Kenya. Azimio did something very strange. They told us, we are not going for maandamano now. Instead, we are going to condole with the victims of police brutality. We are going to do everything in our power to ease the financial burden on those who lost loved ones during the maandamano. And so what happened as a result? Numerous media reports of Azimio leaders attending funerals of victims. People telling the story at the funeral, in front of cameras. What happened to their loved ones? What they were doing before? What they were doing after? Evidence. Evidence to prove even to an outsider that what the Inspector General of the police of that strange country called Kenya is saying cannot be true, cannot be anywhere near the truth. Let me ask you a very simple question. Supposing you are a judge in a case which you are listening to, you don't know who's guilty, you don't know who's innocent, and then one side, in this case, started giving you far-fetched excuses, which don't make sense, what would you start concluding immediately? That they're guilty, of course. That is what you'd conclude. Now, past commissioners of police, that office was renamed Inspector General of Police under the 2010 Constitution. But it's the same office. Holders of that office throughout history, those who have decided to be too close to politics, have not ended in a good place. I can't help but remember the numerous times my late political lecturer, who was a senior officer in the Kenya police, indeed, at the time he retired, he was sitting in an office right next to the police commissioner at police headquarters. My late political lecturer told me countless times that the police is finished. I asked him why? Because the police have gotten involved in partisan politics. That was in the 80s. I was young. There are many things I didn't understand. And to be honest with you, at that time I felt that he was exaggerating things. Especially because he would follow up this comment with the words that it is very difficult and it takes a long time to build something. But destroying it takes just a few seconds. I didn't understand. Because in my eyes the police force was still there. In my eyes it was very easy to correct things in the police force. These building manenos, I didn't understand. Indeed, there were times I felt that the reason why he was exaggerating things was because of sour grapes. Because you see, a very junior officer to him, one he knew very well, and one that he had told me countless times was not straight, had recently been appointed police commissioner. And therefore I thought, this is just sour grapes. Because that police officer, who used to salute him and say, yes sir, was now in an office my late political lecturer would never step into. Courtesy of politics. I will come back to the sad story of how things ended for that particular officer in a bit. But let us start with the case of Ben Gedhi. Ben Gedhi was not only close to the political establishment, the Kiambu Mafia, during the Jomo Kenyatta administration, but he was also mtu wa mkono. In my landmark series, Mboya, it was more than an assassination, which took me over 15 years to research. My conclusion was that it was actually Ben Gedhi who pulled the trigger, fired those 2 shots on Nairobi streets on July 5th, 1969, that ended the life of Tom Mboya. Oh yes, no, it wasn't Nation Jenga. The man was convicted for that assassination, that murder. Yeah, but I'll give you a clue. Look for a photograph of Nation Jenga. Look for a photograph of Ben Geddi. They resemble too closely. Bottom line, if there are any witnesses, and I'm sure there were many, who despite the confusion actually saw Geddi's face when Nation Jenga was produced, they would say very quickly, yes, this is the man I saw. Very clever strategy. Yeah, very well planned assassination. Anyway, let me not digress. You can catch that series right here on this channel. Yeah, it's a list of videos. Mboya, it was more than an assassination. Okay, let's move on. Ben Geddi became police commissioner under the Moi administration. Okay, Moi was a very wise man. Despite everything else, Moi was wise, and so he kept his enemies and the people he considered dangerous close, because he knew the closer they were to him, the easier it was to finish them. Okay, and Geddi is a classic case. Former police commissioner Ben Geddi ended up in prison, in jail, for over a year. And by the time he came out, he was a very different man. He was full of guilt. He made desperate attempts to get certain messages to the family of the late J.M. Kariuki. Yes, he was also involved in that assassination. Yeah. And Kenyans in general. He was so desperate for Kenyans to know what really happened. Yeah. Is that remorse or what? Now in that story, the keywords to be taken careful note of by Inspector General of Police Japheth Koome and those sycophants who want to stay very close to government, who think that they're the best thing since sliced bread just because they're close to the regime. Yeah, the keywords are, when you're close to a government, it is very easy for that same government to finish you. In other words, you're much safer, and your children are much safer, and your grandchildren are much safer by you just doing your job and staying as far away from politics as you possibly can while still keeping your job. That's really what it is. Philip Kilonzo was very deeply involved in the cover-up of the assassination, of the murder of Dr. John Robert Ouko, who at the time of his passing on was the Foreign Affairs Minister of Kenya. And he retired. Somebody else was appointed police commissioner, actually Mr. Duncan Oshira. And Philip Kilonzo was very happy. He must have been patting himself on the back that he had played all his cards correctly. And now his life in retirement would be good. Nothing like that. One day, he was in Ukambani at a place called Matu, enjoying his beer, a white cup. And then somebody called him outside, yeah, to show him a heifer. Ng'ombe mzuri sana, nimekuletea mzee. And he went outside to examine it for a few minutes. When he came back and sat down and took a sip of his beer, his famous last words were spoken in Kikamba. This beer tastes very strange. Minutes later, he was dead. A long while later, some of his workers at that particular bar, which Kilonzo owned, would remember that earlier in the day, somebody whom they knew was an intelligence officer had come around several times asking what time Bwana Kilonzo would arrive, because he was expected. They would remember that little clue that is very critical in solving this mystery. Now, why would somebody be so interested in finding out what time somebody will arrive? What would the reason be? Jijazie. To sum up this sad story, Philip Kilonzo was a loose end. He knew too much about the murder of Dr. John Robert Oko. He was too close to the politics. And you know, when you're close to politics, it is always a question of how dispensable are you? And of course, this changes with circumstances. This can change in an instance. For example, if it is between you and the president, hapo hakuna debate. Who is more dispensable? You, very powerful, very close to the powers that be, or the power itself, the presidency? Who is more dispensable? Hapo hakuna mahesabu. You're gone. And this is what happened to Philip Kilonzo. Somebody who had been so faithful to politicians, somebody who had been very close to politicians, somebody who had been overeager to help politicians clean up their mess, clean up the crazy things they did. You think they'll give you a medal? You think you're indispensable? I'm sorry to say this, lakini hata kama ulienda shule na hiyo hujashika, rudi kwa shule ulize refund. Demand it. Even take them to court. I learned zero. In fact, you took me behind. I can't figure out simple things. Please refund my entire school fees. My parents wasted their money. Refund the money, I use it for something else. Maybe to help me get brains, so that I can figure out very simple things. But actually, I know what the problem is. With all the sycophants of this regime, I know what the problem is. The problem is, to most of us Kenyans, history is boring. Wacha kutuambia stories za history za zamani, za wazee wa zamani. How will they help us? It's useless. History ina kazi, history itapeleka wewe wapi? That is the problem. Because we all know history keeps on repeating itself. And therefore, when you study history, you know what is going to happen. When you study history, you can predict the future. Without being a prophet, without having any special gifts or talents, you can easily predict the future. History is important. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.